Richard, welcome to the Usher Group Podcast. I was really looking forward to today. It's something that I'm very fond of personally, but I think there's going to be a lot of value for anyone that tunes in and listens to this because I'm just still in awe of what Coraggio does for young businesses and ones that are emerging through. But I guess it'd be great just for anyone who's tuning in for a bit of background on you. I was going to do a bit of a bio, but I couldn't even find all the things that you do and what you're involved with. So maybe, Richard, just kick us off with who you are and your involvement with Coraggio.
Thanks, Mike. It's certainly lovely to be here. Look, I think the Coraggio product is a fascinating product. With a surname like Skarzynski, it's about as Australian as you can get.
Absolutely.
My mum and dad were Polish, and it's the age-old story. They came to Australia in 1948 after the war, and both went into business. My mother was a nurse, and my dad was a truckie. And by 1960, 12 years later, my dad had a pretty decent trucking business. So I think, and then 61 I was born, but I think being around the son of a truckie and a nurse, you learn entrepreneurialism or you learn about private business. And I think I've always had a caring factor in me, and I think that was instilled at a pretty young age from Mum about looking after people. And I was privileged to grow up in Sydney in Strathfield and went to a boys' Catholic school where if you were good at rugby, then you were good suddenly at school. And the grades matched the success of the footy team, which was wonderful. And we never could quite work that out when we were at school that suddenly we were getting great grades at school because obviously they wanted us to keep playing rugby.
Footy, yeah. Yep.
And then, as every ethnic mother wants their son to do, go off to university. And then I went into banking straight after uni and then decided to go into private business at 23.
23.
Which, it was pretty fascinating. I was studying at uni. Through that career or through that time, I fell into being a musician. I really enjoy music. And however, as we all know, musicians don't make a lot of money.
Yeah, I did not know that about you.
No, yeah.
So what's the instrument of choice?
Lead guitar.
Lead guitar.
Much to the concern of my mother, she wanted me to play the piano accordion, which I said to her that was never going to happen. But I was happy to play the guitar. And Mike, in days when I went to school, the school rock band played at the school dance, which is probably a bit too different today. Today they obviously have school discos and dances. But then I fell out of live music in Australia into DJing in nightclubs. So that's what I did through university.
Yep.
I DJed part-time in a lot of clubs in Sydney and in Melbourne, and I thought that was... but I learnt at a very young age that the way you got paid as a DJ is the bigger the crowd, the more you got paid. So it was like on a door deal. So you got paid $1 a head, and if you got 100 people, well, you got $100. But if you got 500 people, well, then you got $500. So that was a pretty good system, and you learn pretty quickly that if you're good at your craft, then you get paid appropriately. But if you're not so good at your craft, then you probably don't last.
Yeah, right.
So it's pretty cut and
really
dry.
Performance-based, huh?
Very.
Yeah, right.
Very.
Yeah.
So
there'll be plenty of stories and experiences in amongst that as well. Nightlife.
Yeah, lots of fun, lots of really, and made lots and lots of acquaintances. You meet a lot of people they were great fun times in the 80s. Live music was big in Australia, nightclubs were big in Australia. It was a great era. And from that, we started a business in 1983 in lighting and sound equipment, which was fascinating. It was an area that was very underserviced and a growing market, and I started it with some school friends. But let me tell you, as much as we had university degrees, all of us, we had no idea how to run a private business. None whatsoever. I think we remember the days I don't think we even knew how to do an invoice, because nobody teaches you how to do that, what to include, what does it look like, and as much as we tried to, I've always for my whole life ever just always wanted to sit with people that were in private business and learn from them. But it was one of those things that was just never available.
Wow. Where do you think that fascination came from for you? Was it watching your father with business or?
No, just see people grow their businesses.
Yes,
I could never work out how suddenly, people start with one shop and end up with five, or, whether they go into manufacturing or, back then manufacturing was big in Australia. And there, people were in function centres or, just buying pubs or all those sorts of things that, people don't teach you how to do. There weren't any training courses for it all. So I always remember the bank manager saying to us, we were always with the National Australia Bank, and the bank would say to us, "What's the business plan?" We never had a business plan. We just thought bigger is better,
yeah, right.
and as long as we were making money. But, we did. It was just running blind, and so I always remember employing people, and I think by the time we got to age 30, we still had no idea what we're doing, and the business is growing. And I always wished from a very early age to just be sitting with somebody. I went back to school to do an MBA, and I thought that might be the answer, which I think is wonderful, if you want to run a global business, that's an ASX-listed company. And but unfortunately, it just didn't teach you how to run a private business. They don't. An MBA is a wonderful program. Don't get me wrong. I did it at the AGSM in Sydney, the Australian Graduate School of Management, but it still didn't teach you about, what are the pluses and minuses of running an Australian private business,
Still some major gaps to close, eh?
Absolutely.
Yes,
yeah. We were very uneducated. We were very, I suppose we knew about margin and cash flow and wages and staff but where do you go to learn this stuff and be these pillars of knowledge that I suppose society expects you to have. I think by the time we got to 40 with my business partner, I think we probably made about 1 million mistakes. I think we made mistakes they hadn't even created as mistakes because you just don't know what you don't know.
Yes, yeah.
And I always remember, and by that stage, we had quite a big business, and by big I mean we'd gone to a number of states, and the turnovers were quite large, and we were looking to go, into Asia, into Malaysia and Singapore. We often used to say to our bankers, well, bigger is better.
Bigger is better. Just keep going.
Let's just keep going, it's just...
And this is still the same group of friends from school that...
Yeah, well, it was a really good mate of mine from school that I set it up. There were two of us, and we learnt, and we made lots of mistakes, and people talked about the global financial crisis and all this sort of stuff, and I think to myself, well, we tried to navigate as best we could. I think I've always been a person that's always tried to protect our staff. I think back then, people often talk about you're only as good as your staff. I think we're very privileged. And if you think of your staff as, well, sometimes they say your biggest asset and your biggest liability, but I think if you're scaling a business, then you need people with you. You can't do everything by yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think it's something that is the single biggest thing that private owners are not good at, which is people, because people don't teach you about people and how to manage people and support them. Some of it, we take those values from our parents or our peers. But the single thing I hear in today, a lot of years later, is it can be quite lonely running a private business, as much as we have family and friends and great mates and great accountants and great lawyers. But, you can't just necessarily Google what is a great lawyer and what is a great accountant,
Absolutely.
So,
and even if you have a business with a lot of people that you're employing, they're not going to have the same level of involvement or engagement with the business as the owner. They're not going home with the same stresses and the problems each night. They've got their paycheck, and yes, they're valuable and you need them to grow, but they're not, like you said, it's going to be lonely from that mentality point of view, isn't it?
Very much so. And I remember in my mid-40s, I tried to reach out. Google was only just starting back then, and I think it was very early days. We had the yellow pages, and how do you find private business coaches, private business mentors? How do you get to meet these people? You can't just sort of knock on their door. And I looked around all through my 40s trying to find people that I could just learn from, that we could learn from, and it wasn't that easy at all, So, you sort of continue to take advice from your accountants and lawyers, which are wonderful people.
Absolutely.
But, they're not entrepreneurs
No.
As much as they offer great advice.
And they probably have a more isolated focus as well, on the financials of the business, not the whole global view.
No, very much so. And I think it's, and we saw, wonderful things coming to Australia. We saw the Olympic Games came in 2000, which I think certainly changed Sydney. I think it will change Brisbane in the future. I think that's very much an exciting time. And we also got to work in Malaysia and Singapore, and we saw their economies and we saw what they went through, with the Commonwealth Games and what it is to have an Australian business or APAC business, with staff working both in Australia and working in Asia, which was really unique. And then, I think 2009, 2010, bang, the global financial crisis hits. And, for those people that remember that, it was tough because the banks were basically turning off the credit. Businesses that had big credit lines and big credit facilities were suddenly being told by the banks, look, we're really sorry, but we just can't support those facilities globally.
Wow.
And, and put in plain English, it's like having a mortgage with the bank and you're making repayments and all of a sudden the bank sends you a letter and says, look, it's really nice, unless you can pay this loan in 30 days, we're repossessing your house.
Wow.
And that's what it was like for a lot of Australian businesses, and the banks just didn't have the money. Yeah, well, people talk about COVID. I think certainly for Australian private owners, I think as well as a lot of ASX-listed companies because their limits were being tested as well. The global financial crisis was indeed tough. We saw a brand like Sanyo, who'd been a household name in this country, fall over due to the financing, out of Lehman Brothers in New York. And a lot of brands got changed in those years. And I think that changed a lot of private businesses and certainly was a turning point for my career as we navigated. And I think there's, just on that point, I think a lot of private owners, which I've learned since then, have a rethink on their business around their late 40s, their early 50s. I think it's a part of Australian culture where maybe when people are starting their businesses, they're young, they've got lots of energy, and then suddenly the house comes, the mortgage comes, the kids come, kids' sport comes. So that next 15 to 20 years, there's lots of things going on.
Lot to juggle.
Well, absolutely, and then all of a sudden you get to your sort of late 40s and the kids are growing up and you've paid off the house or you're well on the way and you've done all the Christmas holidays and the holidays overseas and the skiing holidays and the skateboards and everything else. And I think Australians at that age, both males and females, get into a bit of a reflective part of their life and think, well, we're not too far to 60. What does that look like? What are we doing with these businesses? Are we going to keep them, sell them, scale them?
What's important to me now at this time of my life? And
absolutely, all of that. I think that's a really big, and just going to your point, just for the audience, I think that's a really single question that we get asked a lot as I travel, and I've spoken to lots and lots of private owners, but especially in that age group. They're really having a rethink about what does the next 10 years look like, and that includes maybe moving states, moving cities. The world's a small place these days, so we're seeing this population movement around the country. We've lived in this house for 20 years. Do we want to be here for the next? Should we move something else? So, I think it's a very different environment today than it was back in the 80s, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, wow. And so that your business went through that stage and you talked about a change for yourself personally then too. What after that global financial crisis, what was the next sort of pivot for you and where did you go in your business or career trajectory?
Well, I must say, I'm one of those people that went through that. I sort of got to 48, 49, 50 and thought, wow, do I want to keep doing what we'd been doing for 25 years? Had we ridden as much as we could ride to where it was, or was it time for a change? And, what was I going to do for the next 12 to 15 years, or what really floated my boat? So I can really relate to that story that I've now heard so many times since. Absolutely. So I think it's you have a bit of a think about that sort of stuff, and then you start to regroup, and then you start to look at different businesses. I did meet a mate of mine in Sydney that was a shareholder in 10 businesses, and I was fascinated by that. I thought, and one of them being a pizza shop because he liked pizzas. And that really fascinated me, and that sort of probably was a bit of a life-changing moment, that you could be involved in different things and that interested him. So it wasn't just one business, but it was a number of things. And I think that started to broaden my horizon about private businesses and looking around and saying, well, certainly where I am in my career, why should I just be involved in one thing? Maybe we look at a couple of things, which is where we are today. We're involved in a range of industries as a family, which is wonderful. And then I think when I was 53, 54, Coraggio came along, which was, like I'd always wished about being around private owners. And, I think if you put the karma out there, eventually I got a phone call and a colleague of mine one of the Coraggio shareholders rang me and said, would you consider being a chair at Coraggio? I didn't even know what that was.
Yes, yep.
I thought it was actually, to be open with you, I thought it was a religion. I just didn't know.
Just know what it was.
I didn't know what it was. I've never heard
Yep.
of peer-to-peer advisory. It's not like we sort of suddenly get out of bed and think about peer-to-peer advisory.
No, it's like a foreign concept at that time, eh?
Very, very. But when they explained it to me, and I met some of the shareholders, and I was just fascinated. I just wished I'd known about this 30 years ago, and sitting with other private owners and learning from them. And I still learn today. I've been around the Coraggio product for 10 years now, and it still fascinates me today. I hand on the heart, I don't think we would have made the million mistakes that we make and that people make, and because you don't know their mistakes, you're just trying to do the best you can. But yeah, Coraggio, I came across it. It was only in its very humble beginnings in Sydney, and I saw the concept there. They had 4 boards at the time, and I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was just, there was something there with the rawness, the openness of people for a full day every month. And I thought, wow, there's something here. And I have to say I was appointed to chair a board, which is Coraggio Advisory Board number 2. It's the second oldest board in Coraggio, which I still chair today.
Oh,
I'm
really?
privileged to say, yeah, which has been a fascinating ride.
So 10 years on, you're chairing the same board?
Same board, yeah. We've had a few changes, but it's a big board. We've got a really lovely group of, I think, 15 in that board in Sydney. It's on the 3rd Friday of the month, and a number of the members of that board have been members for 10 years as well, and we've seen them all go on their journeys. And look, there's been a huge amount of highs and a few lows, where we've. But I think the net result is today they're in a much better position. Not just financially, but I think they're generally happier people. I think people, when they work out the roadmap, and it's not easy working out the roadmap. The world offers lots of options, but when you work out the roadmap for yourself and what really makes you happy, and then you can build those building blocks, and each day's a great day, and you enjoy the moments. As a number of our chairs say to me all the time, enjoy the moments.
Yes, yep.
And even what we're doing today is enjoying the moment.
Enjoying the moment, absolutely.
Because life is full of that. Then, I must say, and then obviously what transpired after being a chair, the shareholders came to me when the previous CEO resigned and said, would you consider it? And I knew nothing about membership, but I thought I'd give it a go with lots of enthusiasm. And I'd have to say that was 5 years ago now. And as I always say to people, I'm privileged to serve. We've met a wonderful amount of, I don't know how many private owners we've met along the way over the last 5 years. Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and lots in between. I sit on an international panel as well now with other CEOs that do what I do, but in America, in Canada, in Europe, in London, in Poland.
So is that Coraggio as well, or is it affiliate sort of?
Yeah, they sort of do what Coraggio does, but they're called different things. It's the same thing, peer-to-peer advisory.
Wow.
And we meet on Zoom once a month for 2 hours, and I just think it's fascinating. And people say, why are you so enthusiastic about it? And I suppose I just wish I'd known about it when I was 23.
Yes.
And not where I am today, because I see the changes in businesses that happen, and I see the highs, and I see the tears, and I see the rawness of it, because you just don't know everything about everything. I think our oldest member is 80 and still comes to a Coraggio board day, and I often say to him, why do you come? And he says, well, you can't know everything about everything. And I think, but he's 80. So, yeah, it teaches you a lot.
And there's also that value in being able to offer advice too, right? When you're in a part, like it's one thing to receive it, but I think to be able to give it to, there's something very tangibly rewarding about that when you can see you have an impact in someone else's business or their mindset, or, I guess some of my own experience from being engaged now for the last 12 months is seeing the impact that it has with people, not just in their business, but their personal life, with their marriage or their family too, because they're, like you said, getting very raw and real about real life challenges that come with running a business or being a leader in a business, and how that impacts other areas of their life, and going to a third party, peer-to-peer, getting advice on that, and then seeing the net result of the impact of that coming back to the following month and seeing like a positive impact or result. I think that's just, it's very powerful to see. And I think I could imagine for that individual you're talking about, there'd be something that would be bringing them back, knowing that they're having an impact in other people's lives too. So it's that reciprocal. I think
Very
that's
much so.
yeah.
It was interesting. We on every board day that we have a guest speaker, as you know.
Yes, yep.
It was really fascinating. I got the opportunity to interview Wayne Bennett, who's the coach, obviously, at the moment with the Rabbitohs in Sydney, and previously with the Dolphins and then with the Broncos. And certainly, I think the way he coaches at 75 is to be admired. Some people like him, some people hate him anyway.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who've got a respect for him.
Oh, huge respect. It's got a major legacy. You can't deny that.
Exactly. And I said to him, how do you relate to this, a footy team to private business? And he said, look, we're a high-performing team, and a private business is a high-performing team because that's how owners drive the business as a high-performing business. Well, what happens in a high-performing team is you're going to get an injury. Like, that's just what's going to happen eventually.
Yep.
Something's going to give, right?
It's not if, but when.
But when.
Yeah.
And I just think, would you prefer to face that injury by yourself or would you prefer to face it with a team of 13 footy players, And I think I take that advice from Wayne and I thought to myself, wow.
It's a great way.
It's a great connection in what he said to me or great link because, would you like to face an injury in business by yourself or in the safety of a Coraggio board or a board of advisors? And I certainly know where I'd like to be. And I have to say today, I think I live a very rich life as a CEO because if members have a high or a low or an injury, you can either refer them to another member or an associate or a colleague or an advisor and, from a private business angle. And it's not easy running private businesses. It's, there's lots of demands on these owners and to make decisions. And, those decisions are really important because they are made in the interest of people's lives and families and children and mortgages. So, hiring's always fun. Like we all love hiring, that's great,
Yeah.
But like everything, sometimes we've got to make changes to the business and that affects people. And I know lots of owners toss and turn with that. I know one business at the moment, one of our members has lost some major contracts and he's probably carrying 20 staff more than what he should. And what's being affected is his profit, and he certainly is well aware of that. And, he's happy to forego, lots of net profit to keep that staff. And I think often in private business, the owners don't get paid, but the staff do.
Yes.
So
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Richard, with you as CEO, help us understand what Coraggio means to you and what you think that stands for. I know that they've got a bit of a slogan in the background there, and there's obviously a purpose behind why Coraggio exists. But I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, I think the fact that the name, Coraggio, it's an Italian word for courage. It was put forward by one of our shareholders. That I think really resonated with me. The fact that the business has never taken on sponsors or partners from a commercial point of view, which I think is valued by the members. They're never going to be sold to. It's a place for them, first and foremost, and we exist to serve them. I think the chairs is what fascinates me. We have a wonderful cohort of chairs across the Eastern Seaboard that certainly don't do it for the money. They do it for the love and enthusiasm as much as they get paid. But I know they do a lot extra. We certainly saw that through COVID, and we see that all the time when members' businesses are not necessarily going through great times, that they really stretch out and help. I think the support of the board, as much as we've got 10 shareholders, I've got a board above me, and they've been nothing more than supportive all the way through as we've grown, because the business obviously started in Sydney and then we grew to Melbourne, we grew to Brisbane, we grew to the Gold Coast and we grew to the Sunshine Coast, and they've been nothing more than support and continue to support of what is today a really interesting business. I know when I said to them I'd always build them a legacy, and I think it's first and foremost a legacy still. They've never taken... I've been there. The business has existed for 15 years. They've never taken a dividend. They've never taken interest. If nothing else, they've probably put more money in and taken no money out.
Wow.
So I think the fact of living by those values and their investments are what has helped lots and lots of private businesses. So I look at the values of our shareholders who've done nothing more than just support me in my role to continue to go forth. I think is a wonderful group. There's 10 of them, and I think those 10 are really stand out. There's 9 males and 1 female, and I think those 10 have been, wonderful people in my life. So it is certainly a privilege to serve them. And I think the members, the members that have joined and sometimes people don't really know what they're joining. They're joining a peer-to-peer advisory board,
Yes,
and and they come along and they join and they become a part of it. And then I think a couple of months later, the light bulb sort of turns on and they realise, hey, I really need this. This is really good.
Really good.
And then they stay and it starts to really help. And especially when you're in the right advisory board, because each of them have got their own personality, and we've got plenty of them, and right across the Eastern Seaboard. And if you've got the right chair and the right cohort of members, then it really does build that trust and openness. And it's a bit like a footy team, like Wayne Bennett says, you sort of grow together, It's, but I often think of a high-performing team, and I know, our smallest business today is a couple of 100,000, run by a 21-year-old, and I think our largest business is about 900 million. There's a lot in between, but the average age is about 45. There's some that certainly in their 30s and 40s, and some in their 80s. Wow. So, but I think they have a commonality of growth or learning, of lifelong learning, and what better way to learn than from people that have. There's a room full of experiences there, and they're not judged, but everyone looks at a scenario in a different way. 12 different minds looking at something is, I think, in my opinion, for what it's worth, is certainly better than one.
Absolutely.
So it's a day a month. I think it's 12 days a year. I must say, in the 15 years that Coraggio's existed, we've never lost a business, which we're really proud of on our watch.
As in, so you have a member within Coraggio, but they've never gone under as such?
Correct. They've never gone into receivership on our watch.
That's incredible feat. Yeah. And how many businesses do you think?
Oh, there's been thousands of them. But
what's the current active members?
Lots.
But
it's hard. But I was just going to say, if you've got an entrepreneurial chair, and then there's an accountant and lawyer in every board, and 10 to 12 business owners, and they're checking the numbers every month, and some of our chairs are pretty clear on the numbers, they want to see those numbers, then it's pretty hard to go backwards, they're
going to see a train wreck coming.
Absolutely, and that's where I think it leads to, and I think the members that really put a lot into it get a lot out from it.
A lot more of a proactive approach to sustaining business, or growing in a sustainable way.
Absolutely. And people hold you accountable. I think that's the single biggest thing too: accountability.
I've really noticed that. Yeah.
I think, and private owners, when we survey them, that's probably the single biggest thing that comes back. The accountability is because no one really holds them accountable.
Yeah.
Maybe their husbands or wives or partners.
Yep.
But in their businesses, you probably need a bit of that. So
absolutely.
That's Coraggio.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the insight. I remember back to meeting you. I think it was at the Imperial Hotel, actually, down at Main Beach. You guys were there for one of your Coraggio Insights, where you had a guest speaker come in. And I was fortunate enough to come along and, listen in on that, but also get to meet yourself and Brooke, who's here representing you as well. I think the state manager for Queensland.
Correct.
And I remember for myself personally, I was just hungry looking for external advice and peer-to-peer, because I'd sort of been thrust into more responsibility with Usher, and we'd formed our own board internally here within Usher. It only included the director, CEO, COO, and myself. But that environment was new to me, and there was so much that I was, stepping into that I wanted to try and get some external, non-biased advice as well and growth. So really fortunate that you guys gave me the opportunity as well, because I know that it is more targeted at the business owner, and I've seen that from being part of it. But for me, it's helping me grow that business owner mentality, and it's made me much more effective in my role within Usher, but also heading towards my board meetings more prepared, knowing what business owners are looking for, what's important to the business owner, what do they need to see, what do they need to understand, what are the metrics, and that accountability piece. I think that's been so valuable. So, for one, I'm grateful, but just to share on my experience too, I think for anyone who hasn't been part of a Coraggio board, I was just really blown away with the caliber of people that are there, because you have the business owners that are there, and every board, if I'm right, you have them positioned with an accountant, a lawyer.
Correct.
Yep, and the chairman that's running it. So you have these industry professionals that have their, they're a master in their area, and they're looking into your business and probing into, asking those tough questions, getting really raw and vulnerable. And you've got someone who's not emotionally tied up in the people and the situations or the excuses that come up within business, because we can all justify situations that we put ourselves in. But when you go to an external board like that, peer-to-peer, I think they cut a lot of that sort of BS out, and it's sort of, it gets really down to, okay, well, what's the right questions to be asking? Like, do you really need to look at the people, like, people profiling? Have you got the right people in the right roles? And I think it's been extremely valuable for me to be able to come back and take some of that external advice and share it within the Usher board. And it's helped us drive a lot of our decisions and what we're doing as well. And, now that Theo is more removed from the business, I guess he's very entrepreneurial, and I know he's come and spoke at a number of the Coraggio Insights, but he's a bit more removed from day to day of Usher now. So we've had to all level ourselves up, I guess, to take on that running of the day to day business. And I think having peer to peer insight like that is just, I would recommend it. I recommend it so often. I talk about my experience with Coraggio, and I just think, like you said, it's one of those things I wish I'd known earlier in my career development. Not that maybe I would have had access to it, it was probably the right timing, but I very much encourage it for young business owners, leaders that are at sort of my level or above, to just sort of say, look into this, whether it's Coraggio or something else that's professional insight. And I think, it's a wonderful place to be part of. So I'm very grateful, and I think, for me, I'd love to understand from your point of view too, like, what's the vision for Coraggio, and what would you say to people that don't know much about it, and how would they look to get involved?
So Coraggio operates on the eastern seaboard in Australia, in those 5 locations. We are a live product, I believe, and you'll know from attending, nothing beats being in a boardroom for a full day a month live. We don't do Zoom, we don't do Teams. It is a full day every month that you do need to come to. In 5 locations. It's once a month for a full day. I think if you're lonely and you don't have all the answers, then one thing I have learned in the last couple of years is that nobody that's ever made $1 in Australia, or anywhere for that matter, has done it by themselves. That I can guarantee you. And if you talk to the entrepreneurs, the largest ones, whoever you rate in your world, and that's your world, it's not for us to say what that looks like.
Yes, yep.
But whether it's somebody that you consider to be even successful in sport, I can guarantee you they've got a team of coaches, trainers, dietitians. There's a tribe there. Entrepreneurs are built by a community, not by themselves. And I say that to people. You shouldn't, those sleepless nights, those nights at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's a lot of entrepreneurs awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's much safer doing it with a tribe where you can go on the journey together. I think I look at the Coraggio product as pretty unique because we are just private owners or people working in private business, which is very different to people in ASX or non-for-profits. There's very different drivers in those sectors, or middle management, but like if the demands on you, Mike, working in a private business are very different to the demands of you of middle management working in corporate Australia. Trust me,
absolutely.
You've got a family's balance sheets here. It's just, the emotions of the owner, which usually are quite visionary. It's just a completely set of things. However, entrepreneurialism in this country, I don't know whether it's frowned upon, whether it's supported. I've yet to work that out.
There's a bit of that tall poppy syndrome, isn't there?
Absolutely. But I think to the ones, people think, oh, well, I don't need that. I'll just do it all myself. And there's a bit of that bravado in Australia.
Bit of ego, pride.
Yeah. And I just say to you, all of you, put the ego aside for the moment. You can't know everything about everything. And, the best footy players, the best swimmers, the best golfers, whatever you want to just look at sport in this country. We are good at sport.
Yes, yep.
But we're good at lots of things. But they've got a team around them. They're not doing it by themselves. They don't work out their own coaching regime. The first ones to get up there and say, I've got a team of people around me.
Yep.
So, if you're going to have a high-performing business, trust me, there's going to be some wreckage, right? Because it's
the nature of business. There's
it's
no
the nature of
avoiding
business, right? You can't have 30 years of just high performance.
No.
You're going to get some wreckage, and it really comes down to whether you want to do it by yourself or with your footy team. You know?
Yep.
And I encourage people to look at that and look around it and find your cohort or your tribe to be around and different organisations offer different things. But please don't keep your blinkers on, because it's the people that do give it a go, and it is a bit of stepping into the unknown.
Yes, yeah.
However, it works,
Works,
and not because I'm the CEO and I get so passionate about it.
Yes,
but
yep.
I generally see after about 12 months, people, and we often ask members about this, they say they think they're happier people. They genuinely believe they are happier people. And I know why, because they sort of work things out.
Yes, yep.
Life just stops being gooey. They sort of get a clear vision on their family, their personal goals.
I've seen that firsthand,
Well,
sitting
there you
on some
go.
of the boards, honestly. And, without digressing too much, there was certain boards where there was emotions running high and people breaking down and self-image low about where their business was and what it was worth and what they were doing, and then having the advice from the board and helping them see things through a different lens, and then the change from month to month after that, from putting advice into action and just renewed self-worth, changes that they're making within their business, forward momentum. And it's an emotional thing to watch in a positive way, and it's just so rewarding. And I think everyone learns, even if it's not you in that situation. Like, I personally learnt just from osmosis, being in the room, seeing how everyone else handled that, how they responded, and the advice collectively within the room. So I think there's something to be said about surrounding yourself with high performance people, and watching, helping each other, solving each other's problems, I guess. And it's really cool. And I think maybe something else that might be worth talking about is that I know I personally have spoken to a few people when talking about Coraggio or different advisory boards, is saying that their response has sort of been, oh, well, I'm in a really niche industry, or what I do is different. Like, they're not going to be able to give me advice. I think sometimes business owners, like you said, it is so lonely, but they almost tell themselves their own story, that their situation is unique and their problems are unique. But what I guess I've learned as well, being part of Coraggio, is that the commons are the problems are so commonly shared amongst different industries, whether it's $100 million business or a $5 million business or $100,000 business. It could be one employee or 200 employees, but the problems are still shared, I guess, quite equally. So I don't know if you've got any insight on that, or what you would say to someone who maybe feels like they would struggle to get value because they think that their problems are unique.
I say this to all our future current owners and our future owners. Whatever industry you're in Australia.
Yes. Yeah.
First and foremost, we're Australians, and we work within an Australian tax system.
Yes.
An Australian HR system, an Australian Corporations Act. So there's a set framework in this country about, if you want to run a private business, there's a whole lot of guidelines about how you should do that, first and foremost. And as a private owner, you should be aware of that. Now, once you've got all that set, then depending on the business you're going to go into, businesses, if they followed, it's interesting, I read a lot of books, and I know a lot of people probably do as well. But in our opinion, after talking to so many Australian entrepreneurs, there's one book that's written up globally called Scaling Up. It's written by a gentleman called Vern Harnish.
Yes, yep.
And he talks about 4 pillars in a private business, which is strategy, execution, people, and cash. And I think, had someone shown me that book at 23 and said, well, can you give me the strategy? What is the plan? And how are we going to execute it? And what sort of people do we need? And how much cash do we need? And more importantly, are we going to keep it, grow it, scale it, sell it? What are we going to do with the thing?
What is the strategy? Yeah.
What is the strategy? And I suppose reminded me of all those 4 things every month, then would I have a different business today? I think so. And I think that piece of advice there to all owners, because that's often a question that gets asked to a new member, what is the plan for your business? And some are very clear, as to what the plan is. And some are like a kangaroo to headlights, as if to say, well, nobody's ever asked me that question, So I say to everybody, have a read of the book. But that's the framework of Coraggio. That's the 4 pillars that we work under. And we don't it's not just a dozen people getting together for a cup of tea and kumbaya. There is a framework there that we've worked towards. And lots of Australian businesses, lots of them have been built on that framework. 90-day rocks, 30-day plans, 30-day goals, 60-day goals, all those sorts of things, budgets, 2-year cash flows, which to a lot of people is pretty foreign. They've never had that accountant say to them, what's got to be done in the next 90 days?
No.
Because accountants aren't trained that way. So, you need to be hearing it from entrepreneurs. And I think as you do in sport, you need to be hearing that from professional coaches. And that's why we go to those people to be better at what we do. Well, Coraggio is exactly the same sort of thing. We all run private businesses. But the thing I say to a lot of the owners is it's not only just your family there and your family balance sheet, but you also carry this huge responsibility of your staff's balance sheet, and those family and their children and their mortgages. And that's to be taken very seriously.
Absolutely.
Because it is, the private business community in Australia is a very large employer of people. Mm-hmm. And, we need to be clear on that, that both
it's
in
people's lives.
Absolutely, and it's a privilege when people choose to work for our organisation and give up 40, 50 hours of their own time, their family time, to be away from their families, working for our family businesses or private businesses. So that is to be respected. I know, in our private businesses, in our family businesses, we have people that have worked for us for 20 years. And I'm so very thankful that they've chosen to do that. They've given up 20 years of their life to be involved in our family businesses. There's a lot to be thankful there. So I say to all the private owners running businesses in this country, which I've always been a fan of since I was 23, is, look after that staff. There's a huge asset there. And you can't scale without people.
No.
We all want to scale, but you've got to have great people. And I think we've had great members. Well, certainly I think we've had a great board of directors and great shareholders that are visionary to support the business financially. We've had great chairs and continue to have great chairs. And our members, I think, the fact that they're sticky and they stay. They don't just stay for a year or two. We've had some members that have, certainly stayed with us for 10 years. And I think if they weren't getting value, then they would leave. So
there's one of the members that's on my board now in Brisbane under John Sweet Kelly, but she's a member of two boards, a member in Sydney, and she goes to that board one in Sydney and she gets such value, but her business operates in both states.
Yes.
And so she's on a board in Sydney and she's also comes to the Brisbane board. So it just goes to show, and I think she said she's been 10, maybe 15 years. She was one of the founding members. Might even be on your board down there. So, but she just talks about how much it's done for her business and how grateful she is. So she actually invests her time 2 days a month to go between two boards, Brisbane and Sydney. I just thought, wow, isn't that a testimonial?
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's great to see. So, yeah.
So that's the Coraggio story.
That's the Coraggio story. And then what keeps you going, Richard, with it? You obviously, you have so many successful businesses even outside of Coraggio. CEO would not be, I'm sure, an easy thing to do. I'm sure there's a lot on your plate. You're flying around. So, what keeps you engaged? Why Coraggio? Why still at the CEO level?
Look, I think it's, to answer your question, I think I live a very rich life. I think at the core of my life, I'm blessed that we've managed to have 2 healthy children, Michaela and Daniel, who I suppose give you a lot of purpose when you have children in life. I've been blessed to have a great family, a personal family around me, because there are those tough days, and you go home and sometimes you've got to have a tough family around you.
Absolutely.
Which has been wonderful. Great friends, that certainly, and I think if you surround yourself with great people or good people, genuine people, then you're all in the boat together. I find the family businesses still as exciting as ever, and I think they will stay with the family, and I think the children will probably take them on. Wow. Not that there's any pressure to do that, but I still find them as exciting and fun as they've always have been. And we've certainly got the whole family involved in those, which is wonderful. And I think the Coraggio story, I think over the next 5 years, we will continue to work with wonderful businesses. As I'm not exactly sure where the locations will be in the future. But, there's talk about Parramatta, and there's talk about Newcastle, and there's talk about Canberra, and there's always talk about lots of places, which is really interesting, I think. We've certainly enjoyed the success of the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, it's a really emerging business hub there, isn't it?
Fantastic. We've enjoyed all the locations we've opened in. We're only just there this morning. We're heavily involved with the Sunshine Coast Business Awards, and we just see that as a really exciting market over the next 10 years. As we see other locations across the eastern seaboard. I just enjoy, it's still lifelong learning. Every day I meet a private owner and says, oh, but I'm doing this. And I'm one of those people that I think I've always had two ears and one mouth.
Yes,
yeah. I love to ask questions and learn and listen. And you learn every day. And I just think, wow, what an experience, what an MBA program, like you're talking
Absolutely.
to real people every day and hearing their stories. And if we're able to help, which I think I get from my mum, and connect this person with this person or help them with that, then it's been a good day. And I think that's what floats my boat personally.
What a great purpose to have with business and people, eh?
Well, yeah, and be surrounded on that. And so it takes lots of energy, though, I must say.
That's what I do. I sit back and just admire and think, how do you do it? I just see you flying everywhere. You're engaged in so many things, and you always have such high energy. And like you said, you're always so attentive and listening with people. I just think, it's very admirable to watch. But obviously, you really have a passion for it, which is incredible.
Very much enjoy it. And the members, I say a big thank you to them. We're there to serve. Certainly highly regarded, and we don't get it always right all the time. I think we try hard to find the right boards for people. But like every organisation, you certainly across the time there are people that are better suited to other organisations. But I just say to everybody, please don't just do it by yourself. It creates stress and it creates sickness and I went to 15 funerals last year. And one of our members, who unfortunately committed suicide, which was really sad. And we're hearing more of it, and I think that's. A problem shared is a problem halved, so, reach out and talk to us, look up the Coraggio website and we'll see if we can do our best.
Honestly, thank you so much for investing the time. I know you're a busy man, but I appreciate you carving out some time in your schedule to come sit with us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, we're just grateful for the partnership and, me personally being able to sit on one of the boards, but it's, invaluable, and I definitely recommend it to anyone. So thank you for the time today.
Pleasure. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Mike.
All good.
There you go, mate.